So thank you all for being here. I had a moment of panic when Lauren emailed me saying, how do you want to present your slides? I'm like, I don't have it. I'm going to kind of just do a data download, what I know and remember of the career program and how this generally is adjudicated. And then I thought I would just take your questions or we can have a discussion. So I'll start. So my name is Ravi Shankar. I'm the unit head of for Math and Stats. I spent 4 years at the NSF as a program director in the Division of Mathematical Sciences. And before that I was a professor of mathematics at the University of Oklahoma, where I spent the bulk of my professional career before moving to the NSF and then coming here. And myself I never got a career award myself. I think the program had just started out around that time. But I got several NSF grants, and of course I ran the career program within the Division of Mathematical Sciences for a couple of years. There's of course two caveats, which of course you all know, but worth mentioning. So one is that the expertise that I will share is from the Division of Mathematical Sciences. Across the NSF, there are some things that are common, and then there are some things that are materially different, the way they handle it. So if you apply to, say, biology or computer science, they are in different divisions than the MS. So they might have some other things that they look for, so keep that in mind. The other caveat, which is the elephant in the room, is nobody knows what the future holds with anything, right? So whereas the career program, as stated, had tightly integrated three pieces: the intellectual merit, broader impact, which are the sort of two cornerstones of doing any NSF proposal, and then the third piece, which is part of the solicitation, called the educational component. And this is something I will bring up a couple of times when I talk to you all. But it's not even clear if broader impacts will be important or how important going forward. So whatever I tell you is, it's like when you invest in a mutual fund, past performance is no guarantee of future success. So keep some healthy skepticism in mind when approaching. So typically the career program, at least at inception and while I was there in my program, was designed to be sort of a marquee program. So there's people that apply for grant funding, and the idea was, among those people, right, they sift into the categories of junior researcher, mid-career, and senior. And a typical grant does not distinguish, it just takes them all, and then whatever the criteria, they judge them, they rank them on a board. How many of you have served on a panel? So here's some good advice. Currently, the NSF has shut down all panels, but they are thinking of reopening them. I just talked to a program officer yesterday, mostly out of concern for her well-being, but they had shut down everything. They're trying to reopen. When they do, I highly recommend that you reach out to one or two program officers in your area and tell them that you are interested in serving on a panel. They're always looking for people to serve, and the amount of knowledge and experience you will gain about how these things are judged will be 100 times of whatever I can tell you when you watch a panel in action. So that's one of the best pieces of advice I can give. So that said, the typical panel for a typical grant proposal submission has researchers across the board. The CAREER was established for junior researchers. The idea was, let's take junior researchers who are doing more than what a typical grant is asking for, and then encourage them, the idea being, you're doing something substantial, you're setting up to be an academic leader wherever you are, and let's encourage you to do that. So what is different between a standard NSF award and a CAREER award is, CAREER award is 5 years. Standard awards are typically 3. By the way, when you apply for standard, you can ask for 5 years. 99 out of 100 times they will say no. You can try your luck, but I mean, I remember the 4 years I was there, not a single time was a 5-year award given. And this was not ordinary, right? This was people who had won the equivalent of a Nobel Prize asking for 5-year awards. And they always, the question is, you know, we're not giving you a medal. What is it that you're proposing to do that's going to blow our socks off? That was the standard. So the CAREER competition is markedly tougher than your standard. So already it's hard enough to get an NSF grant. CAREER is even harder. Okay, that's point one. That's not meant to discourage, but just to give you a reality check on, you know, if you apply and you don't get it, then just be aware of why that is the case. Competition is way harder. Now, in the Division of Mathematical Sciences, around the time I joined, what they used to do was take all CAREER applications in the entire division, put them in one pot, have a giant panel, sift through, and then make awards. So some awards would go, and the Division of Mathematical Sciences is divided into 8 groups based on subject areas: mathematical, geometry, topology, and analysis, and so on. And that led to obvious bad feelings. Analysis would be like, why is geometry getting 3 and we're only getting 1, and that sort of thing. Because there's a fixed amount of money, and it's going to be divvied up, and it's a 5-year award. So the typical award amount is $500,000, sometimes more, sometimes less. And so that, you know, the math sciences division's budget, annual budget is $230 million. The budget for computer science is $1 billion, give or take. Right? So money was more scarce, so this is how the decision is made. So the year I came in, they broke it up. They said, we'll give each of you whatever, you know, you get $1 million, and you get $1 million, etc. And you run your own CAREER panel, and then you make your awards. That was. So if in a typical year in geometry we would make 30 awards, CAREER we would make 4 or 5, just to give you an idea. So that's the backdrop of all this. So what is it about the project description that's more important in a CAREER award than, say, the project description in a regular award? So this is sort of general advice when it comes to the NSF. There are 2 categories of proposals. One is called unsolicited versus solicited. So unsolicited is, there's nothing written. It just says, if you want money to do research in, say, geometry, apply by November 3rd. And you send in an application or a proposal. That's unsolicited. CAREER is different. It's solicited. It means there's an actual letter that goes out that's approved by the higher-ups in the NSF, and there's a special document that gets approved by the various departments, and then they put out a solicitation. They're asking you to apply for a very specific opportunity. What that means is there are specific requirements that are spelled out, and if you don't hit those requirements, your chance of getting that award is virtually 0. It sounds bureaucratic, and it is, but this is an important point. So what is different about CAREER than the unsolicited ones? CAREER has the usual intellectual merit and broader impacts, but it also has the educational component. And while a solicitation, you should look carefully, does change. Sometimes year to year, sometimes every 3rd year, or something. You read it carefully. So we would joke as program officers, make a T-shirt, hashtag RTFS, you know, to all PIs. So read the solicitation carefully. One of the things that the Career Award is always, Career Grant Proposal is always asked for is, how do you integrate your intellectual merit with the educational component? Now, that can take on many different shapes. It could be that you're going to incorporate some aspect of your research in the classroom. It could be that you're going to organize an undergraduate student conference based on your research. You know, there could be many things, and it straddles the line between intellectual merit and broader impact. And panels are also kind of fickle, right? Some panel might say, the research is so fantastic, the educational component, we're not going to really think of it too long and hard. Some other panels might say, oh no, the educational component is not well integrated into the intellectual merit, so we're going to rank this lower. My point is, don't give them an excuse. Right? So you need to really think about what is the educational component that you are proposing, how does it tie in with the intellectual merit. Now, how a panel might view that, you don't really have control. Your educational component might just be, I'm going to go out into the local schools and talk about the beauty of, you know, Lisp. Right? Just to put a point across. But that may be not connected to your research. And the panel might say, well, it's not connected. So, some things you can control, some things you cannot. Just keep that part in mind. So then what they do is, they look at your research, and now you need to, the other difficult part about career is, at the stage that you're in as a junior researcher, many of you just a few years past your PhD, at the stage you're in, they are asking you to project an impressive 5-year arc for your research program. Right? I don't know about you, I don't know what I'm going to do next month. Right? So that's why the bar is so high. So you need to be, it's this sweet spot, right? You need to be ambitious, but also give the impression, correct impression, that you are able to make progress, significant progress, on what you're proposing. They're not necessarily asking you to solve everything. But if you take the biggest unsolved problem in your field and say, I'm going to do it, but I'm not really going to tell you how, because let's face it, most of us don't know how it's done, how it's going to be done. That's not going to get very far. So it's this sweet spot where you have to project a 5-year arc at the stage you're in, show independence from your PhD, your advisor in your project, to really show, look, I'm striking out. I have this great vision for my field or for adjacent fields. Here it is. And it involves 3 projects, 5 projects, whatever, you know, whatever number of projects. And here is how I'm going to do it, and here's how all of it ties together to the educational component, or some of it ties to the education. Okay? That's the difficulty with the career.
So when we say about showing independence from PhD, does that also translate to your postdoctoral research, or can your proposal be in line with what you did in your,
So this is one of those things that you cannot control,
okay.
right? So I've seen proposals where somebody is showing that they've had a very impressive PhD and postdoctoral fellowship, and they're like, I'm going to continue this and move this forward and move the field forward.
Right.
And sometimes the panel will say, well, that's great, but what have you done? Right? What have you done that shows that these ideas are not just given to you by your advisor, postdoctoral or doctoral? So there is a little bit of that. It's not completely fair, but it's there. Right? A panel will ask that question. So they really want to see independence. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, it can be in the same field, but it needs to be different than what has.
It needs to show something substantially, like moving it forward, and what is your place in that.
Right. Excellent.
So then when you go into a panel, this is why I was telling everybody, you're going to learn 100 times more if you attend a panel as a panel reviewer than whatever I'm going to tell you here. When you go to a panel, there's this interesting arithmetic that happens. They take the total number of proposals, divide by some number, everybody on the panel gets a certain number, you have to read them. A panel is sitting around like this, and then let's say I have a proposal that I was supposed to read, you were reading the same proposal and Steve was reading the same proposal. The program officer will typically say, well, why don't the three readers tell us what you think? So you have to write a review before you show up, you read your review, right? And you tell everybody what you think, you tell them how you rank this proposal and why. After the three speak, then it opens up to the whole panel, and then people ask each other questions, they discuss it. Somebody might say, I don't think I agree with the harsh assessment about this person's career, it's all this other thing. So sometimes can get a little bit heated. And then mercifully the program officer will put an end to that discussion. They'll tell them, okay, I'm obviously being a little facetious, but there's a limited amount of time, how much you can spend ruminating about these things. So after some prescribed amount of time, the program officer will say, are we ready to place this? And there'll be a board with columns. It's a provisional placement. And that's when they will say, is the intellectual merit, the part of the research program they're proposing, how does it compare with the other people who have submitted? And the other people who have submitted will be in your general area, but not in your specific, necessarily in your specific area. So they're comparing the push forward of this field in this sector versus this other sector. And they're making a judgment which one they think is better, both in terms of chance of success and in terms of pushing the field forward. And obviously the final decision on where to place it involves more than just your research program, but that's where things like integrating with the educational component comes in. The vision comes in, how far is it going to push forward, and their belief in whether you can accomplish a good chunk of it. So you have to write killer convincing proposal in order to, and then they place you, and then it keeps going, and then there's some horse trading that goes on, and then some people get moved up a little bit or down a little bit. But it's kind of this weird convergent process, right? As it keeps going and more names get added, people are really wary of really upsetting that board because you've spent so much time getting to what you have. And occasionally there'll be some maverick who'll be like, I want to take this name, which is like rejected, and move it all the way up here, and then everybody else in the panel kills that. The panel kills that. And then the problem is solved. Yes. And they have a limited time. They only have 2-3 days in order to accomplish this. So there's this pressure of time working. So what I'm trying to say is the discussion that happens for your proposal, on average, is about 14 minutes. The whole thing, from what I said, start to finish to price placement. They might come back to it to see if it moves up or down, but that's typically how much time you're going to get. So whatever time you invest in making it as clear as possible, making sure you highlight the solicitation specific criteria, boldface, this is the intellectual merit section. Some people don't even label the section. And then the panel reviewers have to hunt around and find what part is intellectual merit, what part is this, what part. It really irritates them, obviously, right? So these are sort of low-hanging fruit, right, that you can take care of when you write your project description. Make it extremely clear. Make it clear. And then when you write, let's say your problem is, whatever you're investigating, this is again a hard thing to thread, which is put it in context. There are going to be people on the panel who are familiar enough with it that they don't need a lecture like you would give an undergraduate student. But the majority of the panel are not people who are in your field. You're lucky if you have one person in your field on the panel. Right? general rule of thumb is there's gonna be no. Obviously, if there is someone, they are kind of there to advocate for you or for the field in some fashion. But otherwise, you're writing for somebody, if you're in biology, say in botany, you're writing for somebody who is generally in the area of botany, but not necessarily what you do. If you're in computer science, there's going to be other computer scientists, but not necessarily in exactly what you do. So you have to make a compelling case of where you're starting, why you're interested in the problem, what is so important about it, what it is that you're proposing, how you propose to do it. A lot of people don't say how they're going to do it. They're all worried somebody's going to steal my idea. Nobody has the time. Okay? So, write as much of the strategy that you plan to use to solve it as possible. Make it clear why you are the right person to do it. Okay? And then tie it all together as part of a program that you have devised for the next 5 years. And then do this all in whatever, under 10 pages or something. I know it's 15, but you're going to need room for the other stuff as well. I forgot to bring a copy, but I was asked by the notices of the American Math Society to write an article, along with a former program officer, on how to get your proposal funded. So, I'll send you the link.
Sure, I'll happily distribute it.
The other thing I will also say is some PIs get really upset, when they receive their reviews. Most people are rejected, right? The rejection rate is around 80%, 75, 80. For career, it's 90. 85 to 90. So most, chances are proposal is rejected. So they'll then call back and try to argue with the program officer saying, that reviewer was biased against me, or this person hates my work. Okay, don't waste your time with that nonsense. I can tell you for a fact that there are so many checks and balances along the way that that's not going to happen. In my 4 years, there was one egregious case of one person saying something, and the moment they started, the program officer pulled them out of the room and read them the Riot Act. And it was done. So, it's, unless you're the unluckiest person in the world, it's going to be judged on its merits. Yes, there are sometimes panels will aggregate and they're like, we don't really like that area, and that might get torched because of it. But that's life, right? There's nothing you can control. So I think that's sort of, I wanted to give you an overview of the process, the toughness of the competition, and how it was judged, and so on. I'll stop here and see if you have questions or anything you want to follow up. I didn't mean to be a mood killer. Yeah?
Since you have the article written on how to get your proposal funded, I have a question on that line. So what makes a difference between your proposal getting funded versus not getting funded?
So there are two ways to see it, right? So there are proposals that are written which are not competitive, right? Either you do a poor job of writing it, which includes just not explaining it very well, and just expecting the panel to just give you money because you asked for it, or suggesting something so ambitious with no plan to attack it, or showing no track record. Track record is super important. It's like the mutual fund thing again, right? They want to know that you have solved problems in the past in order to make sure that they're giving money to somebody. So that's one category. There's a second category of person who doesn't get funded, and this is the one that is, as a program officer, that kept me up at night. It was horrible. This is, imagine that the funding rate is whatever program I'm in, let's say it's 25%. There was a few people, usually around every year there would be 2 or 3. They would consistently land in the 30th percentile. and not get funded. Right? So what that means is they're doing good work, but it's not great work. Right? Competition was so tough that every year, you know, I would see their names, I was like, oh yeah, I've seen this name. Like every funding cycle, not funded, I can pull up, you just remember all the declinations I've written for this person. And then every year they come in and then there'll be a fresh set of people who are doing fantastic work and then they get pushed just below that funding. So what happens is there is a process to help with that as well. It's called equalization. Program officers are aware of this. They're also, what equalization basically means, there are some people and some projects and some areas that consistently get ignored or pushed down by panels. There's always a little bit of money left over. There's some horse trading that goes on with other programs. They'll pull some money and fund people like that. But that's sort of an outlier, right? Most people either, you try more than once, and that's really the key to success, is to keep trying. You try more than once, eventually your work gets known well enough that people recognize it, and assuming they value it, it gets funded. And then there's some people who just simply won't put in the effort. They write poor proposals, it gets tossed. Some programs, we didn't do this for career in EMS, but I think they did it in other divisions. They have something called triage. The idea is they have so many proposals, right? They'll ask a panel before the panel meets to give a rating. And if a proposal is reviewed by 3 panelists, if a proposal gets 3 poor ratings, they won't even look at it. It's tossed. It's no discussion, so it's 0 minutes of discussion. Right? And they'll give you a boilerplate, sorry, not competitive enough.
We used to do that in Geo. If it came through with ad hoc reviews that were fair or poor.
Well, that's the kiss of death. Yep.
Yeah, then they would, a panelist could just say, I vote that we don't even review this. And it wasn't often, but it happened.
So triage is very much a feature, especially if you only have time to look at 30 or 35 proposals in the time you have, and you have 50.
That makes sense. I'm sorry, right?
Yes.
But it makes sense, right?
Because what's the point of spending 15 minutes discussing and then to toss it?
That.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
So the career award you can apply anytime before your tenure, right?
Correct.
So I wonder, do you think, or do you have an idea like which year is time to apply? I heard like from some friends said probably the first year is not good. I also heard that one friend he just got the career when he applied, like the first year he applied and he got. So I don't know.
If you feel ready, you should apply.
So
Right? Don't worry about first year versus 30.
Okay.
Right? If it's your first year and you feel ready, like you have a program for 5 years that you can highlight, then apply. Right? You never know who your competition is.
Yeah.
Right? Suppose you chose not to apply, but by the law of averages, that year maybe it was not so competitive. You might have got it.
Okay.
So, as long as you can pull together a strong proposal, you should apply.
Can you talk about good ideas for integrating the intellectual merit with the educational component, specifically at our institution, what that might look like? Some suggested, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, and I don't want to be prescriptive.
Yeah, for sure. I
Because
understand.
this is one quick lesson you learn as a program director, is never tell people how to get a grant.
Yeah.
Ever. Right? Once you left the NSF, you can write articles about it, but that was the content of a lot of these PI's calling, right? They would couch it in various ways, but basically they were asking, what do you want me to write so that I get an award? Right? So that said, I would, your best bet, so of course I can tell you some things, some ideas, but your best bet is to look at funded awards, which is public knowledge. Right? Look at the abstract. And if you happen to know the people who received the award and they're willing, ask them if they're willing to share their project description with you. And don't just look at, say, 2023, right? Look over a period of like 4 or 5 years, look at funded awards, career awards, and see what are the things that panels are valuing for exactly that, the educational component. So it's not really a secret, but they go to great lengths to make sure it's not the same panel, right? In fact, panels essentially have no memory. It's going to be basically different. That said, for career panel, so for like a regular panel, they'll get people from all walks, right? From undergraduate institutions to R1s with graduate programs. They want a good mix in there. But career is different, right? They're not going to get junior people in there. At least that was true with DMS. They want people who can look at the arc of a field and give a good estimation of, is this going to really push the field forward, as well as be able to judge, can this junior person accomplish more than just putting out papers, like all this stuff that you're saying. So it's typically more senior people. So that means it's going to be former career awardees as well as senior people that you may know and respect in your field. The other ones are going to be on these panels. So over a period of 5 years, it is actually relatively likely that some well-known person in your field has served more than once. So as you look over a period of, say, 4 or 5 years, look at the abstracts, try to get some information. That should give you a pretty good idea of the kind of things that your community values. And that varies, right? So in DMS, it was things like, PIs didn't always say, here's my research and how I'm going to use my research exactly like this. Sometimes they were independent. Like, this is my research, and if it was, say, for example, a female PI, you'd be like, I'm going to go into middle schools and teach them how to code. Right? Something like that. But it could also be connected. So, but you have to show a connection. It shouldn't be like, I've never done this before in my life, but give me $500,000 and I'm going to do it. So there has to be a little a track. Feel free to chime in. As I was telling them, I'm more, the caveat is I did this one through DMS, and culture does vary.
It does. A little bit. There's some continuity among careers, but
Right.
And I think I mentioned this last time we all met, but triage is very common in some directorates. Engineering, for example, is known to triage
Almost
in
everything.
lieu of their proposals, right, before they even get to people looking at them. We didn't do it very often, but.
We did it for the postdoc program, because we got.
Yeah, you get a mittful of those, right?
But otherwise, it's pretty rare.
Yeah, we did it for postdocs too. Well, the people that did postdocs. I will say one other thing, and you may have talked about this before I came in, sorry I was late. In the current uncertainty of the federal
We did talk
funding
about that.
climate, the comment that you made of if you're ready to go, do it, I think is particularly relevant, because we have no idea how much money is gonna be out there for the next X number of years. I wouldn't be surprised if it varies a lot year to year. So, you might hit a good year, right? You might not. And a lot of times, the ability to fund things, well, it's always, but is dictated by the amount of money you have available. It's dictated by the amount of money you have and how many proposals are submitted. And in Geo, career proposals were competing in a given program with non-career proposals. They were all lumped together. And so if for example, tectonics, which doesn't exist anymore, but if tectonics has a $13 million a year budget, careers were part of that. As well as, that's not always the case, but that's the way they did it in that program.
So it was true in my program as well, except that career was the very first thing that happened, right? The fiscal year started October 1st, the career panel was like October 7th. Right? So, like, the money wasn't even in the program, and we were running the panel. That's how it was. So even though it's part of the same budget, that was the first thing that the money would go out the door was from career. So as you get towards the end of the fiscal year, right, then there's all these shenanigans about, oh, let me see if this other program has money they can give us, can I mortgage this proposal for X number of years and pull a little bit more money to award that other proposal. All that stuff happens more at the back end. Career is pristine. Money is all there. It's all about what the panel is going to say. And then the program will say, this is it, we're going to make 4 awards. If they're really fantastic, then they might make 5, right? Because they can't really distinguish between a couple of proposals. So that's about as, I don't know, meritorious as it gets.
No, I have a quick question, not because I want it, but like, what, can we still say anything about diversity in a grade? Can I still say that I mentor underrepresented students? Because NSF used to value that a lot. Can that still be anywhere?
I don't think
mentioned?
anybody knows the answer to that
I
question.
know, but I mean, would you say anything, or would you just say I mentor undergrad students?
I can give you my personal
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah, yeah.
This has nothing to do with the NSF. Because I was telling, I don't know if you were here when I said it, I was speaking to a close friend who is a program officer now,
Uh-huh,
right? And the NSF has canceled all panels.
uh-huh.
And nobody there knows. I think they are looking to cut 25% of the workforce at the NSF.
Uh-huh.
So when all of that is happening, if you ask the question, can I put underrepresented? I mean, nobody's.
Sure,
You're
but
gonna
I
do-
mean, what would you do it?
What
We have-
I would,
We have to write the grants now, so we have to,
do July, right?
well, sure, right?
Just check it, yes, okay.
Aren't you writing now if it's due in July, right? Like, do
Me?
it
No,
quickly.
I'm a procrastinator, but I would probably start in May, but don't do that. Do what, what's that lovely expression? You do you, right? But I can give you my personal opinion.
Yes, yes.
If I were, I don't even remember when I was last 25, but if I were just starting out and writing in this climate, I would frame it, I would not use these words that are now charged, like diversity, underrepresented, minoritized. There's actually a list that they are tracking. Whatever Elon Musk is doing, they're tracking these words.
Okay.
I would frame things in terms of, we're lifting up rural communities,
Okay.
which is a real thing.
Uh-huh.
We are doing those things. We're trying to help students from all backgrounds. Also true statement.
Uh-huh.
Right? Framing it like, there are people who are disadvantaged, and what we're doing is going to try and help them. And if you can pull statistics about how many students from rural communities actually make it to college or succeed, or the difficulties they have, first generation students, what have you. But the thing to note is, you can still write your proposal or write a draft and have all that. It is entirely possible that the NSF will just toss broader impacts out the window. So, the solicitation itself might change dramatically.
You'll remember last time that Dr. Capaldi told us to make sure to check 90 days before.
Yeah?
My gut feeling is that most solicitation will be rewritten.
Probably.
They're already doing it. They removed the leaps competition. They were rewriting it.
It's not-
Again?
And it's not
It
just.
came
and
out in January, didn't it?
No, they removed it from consideration, and they were going to put it out for a deadline in April,
Yeah.
but they were rewriting it. I don't think they're done.
Um,
Well, you would know more, but that was the last I heard.
yeah, so it did come out the middle of January unless they pulled it again. April 17th deadline.
So they're still accepting?
So they took it down in December,
Right.
and then it went back up mid-January. It's still up.
But the requirements have changed.
Yes. Yeah.
So, one other thing I was thinking about as Ravi was spreading his
Gospel.
his gospel of doom and gloom.
Wow.
No. One thing about career proposals to think about is since they are more expansive, include longer timeframes, include multiple components usually, although they're usually integrated, is you can think of, as you're writing a career proposal, your chances of getting it funded are pretty slim. But, let's say you go compete a couple of times and you don't get funded, frequently there are parts of career proposals that you can pull out and repurpose for a different proposal, right?
Yep.
For a different
That
competition.
happens all the time.
So if you think about that, it's not that you're really wasting your time. You're trying for the pie in the sky, but there still can be some things in there that'll pay back, right, later on.
Yep. And frequently people will submit career proposal and regular in the same year. And depending on the program, so there is a stipulation that if you submit the same proposal twice, it's like antimatter and antimatter, they will cancel each other, or they will toss it back to you, return without review. But depending on the program, how strict they are in terms of that. Certainly in DMS, they were like, here's a career proposal, and here's a regular proposal, the intellectual merits are basically the same. I mean, what else are you gonna do, right? You're not gonna invent new intellectual merit, this is your research. Then that was fine. But the understanding was you're only gonna get one award, you're not gonna get,
Yeah, I was telling this group the last time, a friend of mine did that, and basically the program officer called him up and said, which one do you want?
exactly.
You're only getting one, which is it?
One other point I'll add, and this Steve may have touched on it, when you make your budgets, you should, of course, don't put in expenses for, the wine bar or whatever it is. But generally speaking, that was almost never a consideration for an award. Right? So most people will ask for travel money and salary, summer salary and equipment and whatever, you're organizing a conference for participant sport and things like that. People would worry, and I had PIs talk to me saying, well, did you turn me down because I asked for, I don't know, 50,000 more than in this category? Then panels almost never look at the budget. Sometimes a panelist will bring up and say, this is crazy, this person wants, where the average award is 300,000, this person is asking for $1.5 million. basically they're saying, my work is 5 times as good as anybody else who has submitted. You're not gonna get 1.5 million. The program officer knows that. You know, and then they'll tell the panel, that's what we did, is don't worry about the budget. Is the proposal good enough to be funded? That's what you're looking at. We will take care of it on the back end. You can ask for 1.5 million, you're only gonna get 400,000. Take it or leave it. That was, so the budget part, don't sweat it.
Especially for careers, which usually have a target budget anyway.
Yeah.
500K or whatever it is, right? So,
People will still ask for 800.
they won't get it.
They won't get it, but they still ask.
Do you think that's true across NSF or primarily career
Which one?
proposals about the budget? Don't sweat the budget.
No, that was true for every program I handled.
Yeah. And we would, as program officers, we would, exactly as Ravi said, we would tell panelists that. If there's something particularly egregious in the
Right.
budget, call that out. Otherwise, don't worry about it.
I mean, and it was rare, but sometimes people would pay themselves a crazy salary and not give their graduate students anything. Right?
I'll say that I got comments when I submitted my DRC bio the first time on the budget, and that I had one summer student, and that was not enough to have a community of students, you know? So I got comments
Right,
on
but-
how many students I had proposed to have, that I had proposed one, and that my budget was, for reagents, that was too much. So-
But the decision typically is not hinged on that. So they might have said,
Sure,
I don't
but
know
I
what
mean,
they
it
said.
should not even be like there if it's not relevant, right?
What I'm saying is, I would make a distinction between saying, you know, if a panelist were to say, you only have one student,
Uh-huh.
whereas to show effectiveness, maybe you should have more,
Mhm.
versus a panelist saying, you asked for 500,000 when you should only be asking for 4. That sort of comment, even if it's in the review or said in the panel, typically will not have any effect on the placement. And certainly the program officers are well aware of
The other thing that Ravi said that is maybe somewhat pertinent to this too is, like classes, panels have characteristics, right? There can be some vocal people on a panel that can steer things in a certain direction, right? And maybe the next year they aren't there, right? It's a different group. So there is some of that, and it's human nature.
And that's where the program officer comes in, right? You have to be firm but gentle, because you don't want to alienate people. And you want to make sure everybody gets a chance to voice their opinion. Even, they welcome contrary opinions. You want to hear all sides. But if one person is dominating, I didn't do it, but I've seen a program officer pull somebody outside. Put a cork in it.
Most panels are quite collegial,
Yep.
you know. So. And as Ravi said, if you get a chance to serve on a panel.
I told them to write to the program officers and ask to serve. They're always looking for people.
And they'll often want like a short bio, you know, what's your background, because you need to know, you need to make sure you have the appropriate expertise to serve on a certain panel. And that'll often be based on what kind of proposals come in, right?
Send your CV.
Yeah, exactly.
Include a publication listing. One more comment, because this was true for DMS, I don't know how broadly this is true. If you're applying from here, right, typically there are not graduate programs in most of the programs. But I know Bio does, some others do not. And whether this is a hard but true fact, that is going to count against you. There's nothing you can do about it. Certainly you did in DMS. Because you're competing against people who are going to say, I'm going to train 5 graduate students over the next whatever number of years. assisting in these projects, or I'm gonna have a postdoctoral fellow or something like that. Panels have instructions that if you have proposals from PUIs, then you have to use different criteria. You cannot use the criteria of, you have grad students, because we don't. And the same for the rate of publication, how many papers you produced. So they're not saying the quality has to be lower, or can be lower, it just has to be that if somebody from an R1 with a lower teaching load is producing X number and you're producing something less than X, then they should take that into account. But in the discussions, that point doesn't always get made forcefully, so you have a bit more challenge to sell your work, to point out that your arc that you're proposing is still extremely worthwhile. And if you can pull in undergrad students and as part of your educational component and sell that, that'll go some ways towards mitigating.
They just that, so for those, I'm not writing career myself, but so from the perspective of someone writing a proposal, would you recommend flagging or highlighting, like in the proposal narrative, that JMU is a PUI, and so, or is that, in terms of that, you said it may or may not come in the panel discussion, it can work either way. Okay,
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly, you wanna flag it right in the beginning once, that's fine.
But not belabor, because I know there was, until at least recently, the focus on broadening participation, like in NSF grant categories and.
But you could certainly highlight training X number of students each year, right?
Yep.
So your impact over 5 years is gonna be on, right, directly on X number of students, and that's compelling no matter what.
And don't be shy about telling them that your teaching load is substantially higher than a lot of people who are submitting. Like somebody at Michigan is teaching 1-1. So, by the way, feel free to reach out. This is not like one and done. If you have other questions that come up, right? Read the solicitation, please.
Okay, well, thank you very much for.
Of course, thanks.
And we will meet again in 2 weeks to talk more about broader impacts, I think is next, and then educational activities.